Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of my video series on significant figures. Hopefully you saw the first part, which introduced what significant figures are and how they're used in different measuring devices. In this video we're going to get into kind of the nuts and bolts or the nitty-gritty of how we count significant figures and the rules that we use when doing calculations with them. So let's start off with the easy part with significant figures for addition and subtraction. And by the way, the rules for addition and subtraction are very different than the rules for multiplication and division. So we'll deal with that in a second. When you're dealing with multiple measurements, and let's say you're adding 3 different measurements together. I'll go ahead and write the measurements. Let's say we're doing 12.11 centimeters. And make sure I got the right brush here. 12.11 centimeters. And let's add 18.0 centimeters. And let's add 1.013 centimeters. Okay, so it doesn't matter if we're subtracting, adding, whatever. The rule to follow when you're adding or subtracting significant figures is you simply look at the number of digits past the decimal to determine how many digits past the decimal you can go in your final answer. In this case, this number has 2 digits past the decimal. This number is 1 digit, even though it's a 0, it does count. It's there for a reason. And this number, this measurement has 3 digits past the decimal. This is our limiting factor. We can only go 1 digit past the decimal when we add all those numbers together. Now, if you put it in your calculator, you're going to get 31.123. And if you list it that way, that's incorrect. You get the right answer, so to speak, but you're going to lose some points because you're not paying attention to significant figures. You can only go 1 digit past the decimal. So your final answer should only be 31.1. And once again, that 1 digit past the decimal there is limited because of that measurement right there. Very simple rule to follow for addition and subtraction. You simply look at the number of digits past the decimal, and that determines how far you can go in your final answer. Okay, one side note, be careful about rounding. Let's say we have 43.88 centimeters. And let's say you can only go 1 digit past the decimal, all right? So make sure when you round that digit, the 1 digit past the decimal, it's going to be 43.9. So when you drop that guy, make sure you pay attention to your rounding, and that's what your final answer is going to be, okay? Now it's a little more complicated when we go on to multiplication and division. Before we do that, we have to figure out how do you count the number of significant figures. So far, all we've done is we looked at the number of digits past the decimal. That's not really counting significant figures. So for multiplication and division, we can, once we do our calculation, our answer can only have as many significant figures as our least precise measurement, what we call the weakest link in the chain, so to speak. So before we do that, let's come up with the rules on how we count significant figures. Now, there's lots of different ways to do this. Actually, when I started off teaching, there was a chart in the classroom that had 10 rules to follow. It was absolutely ridiculous. We found this thing in an old chemistry book. Very simple rule, and it makes counting significant figures so much easier than following those 10 rules. So it's called the Atlantic Pacific Rule. So I'm just going to draw a rough picture of the United States, and you can see why I don't teach geography, but you get the idea. Okay, so it got chopped off a little bit there. The main thing is we want to visualize the oceans and the Atlantic. And this is basically going to give us a guide on which way we begin counting when we look at the decimals, okay? So the rule is if the decimal is present, so I'll write this up here, decimal is present. The P for present means you begin counting in from the Pacific side, okay? If the decimal is absent, you're going to begin counting in from the Atlantic side. I can spell Atlantic there, okay? So basically you just look at the the measurement you made. Is the decimal present? Is it absent? And that's going to tell you which way you begin counting in on the number. If it's absent, you're going to count in from the right side of the number. And if the decimal is present, you're going to be counting in from the left side. The Atlantic Pacific rule is kind of an easy way to figure out which way you begin counting, and that simplifies things quite a bit. Once you figure out which way you begin counting, the rule is the same for both ways, no matter which way you're coming in to count. Okay, and the rule is simply this. You begin counting the digits as significant once you reach the first non-zero digit. Once you begin counting, then every digit including zeros counts as significant. I'm going to say that one more time. You begin counting digits as significant once you reach the first non-zero digit, and then every digit including zeros will count. So what do I mean by that? Well, let's do an example here. Let's say we have this digit. Let's say this is a measurement, okay? And first of all, you say, okay, which side do I begin from? So the decimal's present, so you begin counting in from the Pacific side. So you begin counting in that way. So the rule is begin counting with the first non-zero digit. So it doesn't count, doesn't count, doesn't count. Now there's a non-zero digit, so it counts. Now everything counts, including that zero. So that's one significant figure, 2, 3, 4. So you list that as 4 sig figs. Okay, once again, if you'd started counting in from the wrong way, you would list that as a totally different number of sig figs. Here's another example. Let me give you two measurements here. 40.230. Let's say this would be miles. And let's compare that to 40.230 without a decimal. How many significant figures are in each of those measurements? So in the first one, the decimal point's present, begin counting from the Pacific side. So I'm going to count from this way. So first digit's a non-zero digit, so it counts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That last zero does count, because once you begin counting, then everything counts. So that has 5 sig figs. This one, the decimal point's absent. I begin counting from the Atlantic side. That zero doesn't count. It's a non-zero digit. Now you begin counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. That has 4 significant figures. Okay, brings me to a point. When you write a measurement, let's say you have 500 something, I don't know, millimeters or whatever. Okay, writing that versus writing this mean two different things. Okay, this one only has one significant figure. You're counting in from the Atlantic side, that counts. This one has 3 significant figures. Okay. Put my units on there. So that is 1 sig fig, that has 3 sig figs. Putting the decimal at the end means something. Once again, remember in the first video, the last digit's an estimate. These were measured with 2 different devices, 2 different degrees of precision. Okay, so you need to pay attention to the decimal if it's present. Okay, now let's get on to the last part here. You're multiplying or dividing numbers. Okay. Once again, the rule is your answer can only have as many significant figures as your least precise measurement. Okay, so let's try some kind of problem here. Let's try 40.23 centimeters. Let me scroll down a little bit here. So 40.23 centimeters, and you want to multiply that by 18 centimeters. You put it in the calculator. If you didn't know anything about science, you would get 724.14. And that's now going to be square centimeters squared. Okay, is that the right answer? Yes and no. For a non-scientist, they would fringe on that and they would say, no, they're not paying attention to significant figures. This measurement has 4 significant figures. This measurement has 2 significant figures. You're only precise as your least precise measurement. Just like in sports, you're only as strong as your weakest link. This is your weakest link. This is your least precise measurement. My answer can only have 2 sig figs. Now, I've seen students make this is a huge mistake. They say, oh, I can only have 2 sig figs, so they say it's 72. Okay, don't do that. Ooh, that'd be really bad, okay? So you got to list this number with 2 significant figures. So all of this goes away, but what you do is you replace that with a 0. So it becomes 720 centimeters squared. That's got 2 sig figs. Notice no decimal at the end. If I put a decimal at the end, how many sig figs does it have now? It's got 3, so leave the decimal out. You could also write it as 7.2 times 10 to the 2, okay, centimeters squared. When you're dealing with scientific notation, this doesn't mean diddly squat. You don't even have to look at it. All that matters is the numbers in the front, and this has 2 significant figures. It doesn't matter which way you count. So you can list it in scientific notation, and as the course continues on, you'll find out we'll use scientific notation extensively in this course. So you just kind of get used to that. So once again, your only precise is your least precise measurement. Okay, one final note and then I'll be done. When you're doing a multi-step calculation, do not round any of the digits until you get to your final answer. And then you round your final answer to determine by the number of significant figures with your least precise measurement. In other words, don't round each step in your calculator and continue on. That will give you a very strange answer in the end. Only round your final answer to the correct number of significant figures. There are there are some rules with significant figures when you're dealing with logarithms, but we don't have to worry about that until second semester when we deal with acids and bases in the pH scale, and we'll deal with that issue when we get to it. For now, this is enough on your plate to know how to add and subtract, multiply and divide, and how to count significant figures. Okay, so review this as many times as you need so that you've become proficient with significant figures and we can use them throughout the year. And I hope this helps and have a great day.